and established, they want to continue and to be there forever. But M.A. Thomas Achen, affectionately called as M.A. Achen, he renounced when everything was established. He gave the place to another church leader, Reverend Dr. K.C. Abraham. You can see that the pictures of all those founders. And there are many others from the Marthoma and the CSI churches. And maybe after a few more years, my picture will also be hung up there. So will be there. So sometimes people will be asking me, as I am from the Catholic tradition, how you manage to come to this center, which is a Protestant center. Then I would say the first answer is that, the ecumenism. But there is also a humorous answer, because, we have the most important churches. We have the Orthodox, the Jacobite, Marthoma, and the Methodist, and then many other churches. But we have two important churches, CSI and CNI. That is the Church of South India and the Church of North India. Then I used to tell them that, there is a big gap between the Church of South India and the Church of North India. And I came here to make a bridge between them from the Church of Middle India. Because I belong to the CMI. And CMI could be called as Church of Middle India, but actually it is Carmelites of Mary Immaculate. So that is the role I am playing here, and we have a wonderful staff. We have the Deputy Director Milnun, and the Finance Officer, and then Jebaraj, and then many others who are here taking care of you. And we try to do lots of transformation. And as you know very well, science is maybe considered as the refinement of our own reason. Might be started when we started asking questions, and its perfection could be there in the reasoning. But also we have the basis that wonder, but we also have the awe. And basing on that awe, we come across to the faith. And Saint Thomas Aquinas said that, reason and faith are coming from the same source. So there should not be any contradiction. But we may find that, there are people, scientists like Dawkins, about whom our prestigious speakers, they will be speaking on. They wanted to make a wedge between science and religion, and like Auguste Comte in the 1930s, when he said that, the religious should be eliminated by the metaphysics, and the metaphysics should be eliminated by the science. So I think we have a reductionistic approach today, steamrolling all of the traditions. And I think it is our duty to stand for this integration of faith and reason. So one of the important places in integrating this faith and reason, science and religion, is the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion, established at the Cambridge University. It was supported by, I think, a person known as John Templeton, and then also the officials and the authorities of the Cambridge University. And this center was established by none other than who has taken the initiative, that Dr. Dennis Alexander. So Dr. Dennis Alexander 2 years ago was organizing a science and religion conference at the Faraday Institute, and I had the opportunity to listen to him, to interact with him, and also many others. And I would say that this conference is the result of that interaction. And what I found in Dr. Dennis is that, a person who is committed to this cause of integrating science and religion, and this science and religion is the two important wings of the human spirit, as Pope John Paul II in his Fides et Ratio has said. So we need to integrate, and we had discussions and interactions, and that ultimately resulted to this conference. And they will be going from here to elsewhere as well to continue this great tradition of integrating the reason and faith and science and religion. So Alexander Dennis, Dr. Dennis Alexander, I must say that he's a wonderful human person. The warmth of his personality and also the way he has related to me, that brought me. I must say that so the feasibility of bringing them, these prestigious professors from the University of Cambridge to India, and also to this center, ECC Ecumenical Christian Center. There are many things to speak about Dr. Dennis Alexander, so I just read out a few things. Dr. Dennis Alexander has written on the subject of religion and science since at least 1972, when his book Beyond Science was reviewed by Hugh Montefiore, then Bishop of Kingston, upon themes in the New Scientist, in which Montefiore noted that Alexander never came out in that book explicitly in support of evolution. Alexander has stated that he believes that the Bible is the inspired word of God from cover to cover, and that this position is consistent with his support for evolution. Alexander is a critic of intelligent design, arguing that is not science and should not be taught as such. He gives an overview of his position in his article, Creation and Evolution in the Blackwell Companion to Science and Christianity. Alexander responded to Stephen Hawking's The Grand Design by stating that the God that Stephen Hawking is trying to debunk is not the creator God of the Abrahamic faiths, who really is the ultimate explanation for why there is something rather than nothing. Adding that Hawking's God is a God of the gaps, used to plug present gaps in our scientific knowledge. Science provides us with a wonderful narrative as to how existence may happen, but theology addresses the meaning of the narrative. Alexander has been quoted in many such books as Dawkins' God, Genes, Memes, and the Meaning of Life by biochemist and theologian Alistair McGrath. He also makes an appearance in the documentary film The Trouble with Atheism, where he discusses his views on science and religion. So, dear friends, here a very prestigious person, a brilliant and illuminating scientist who has gone deeper into the study of biology. So let us welcome him with a round of applause. And I ask our Deputy Director to honor and welcome the Dr. Dennis Alexander. So Dennis, please. So our custom in Karnataka is to adorn you with a cap that is known as the Mysore cap. And then the shawl is from Manipur, from the state of our Deputy Director. So this is hand woven. Because it will be warm. Well, friends, we have Reverend Dr. John Weaver. Dr. John Weaver started as a geologist. Then he switched to become a a pastor in the Baptist church. And he is a theologian, and he was speaking, he was teaching in different universities and also establishing centers. We had a dinner together yesterday, and then I saw that how he was fascinated about many of these theological, philosophical and scientific controversies, and he was coming out with very clear-cut answers. So Dr. John Weaver was born and brought up in Cardiff. After taking degrees in geology at Swansea, he taught at the University of Derby. John trained for Baptist ministry in Oxford and was then pastor of Highfield Baptist Church from 1991. From 92 to 2001, he taught theology at Regent Park College, Oxford, and from 2001 to 2012 served as principal of South Wales Baptist College. He is a former president of the Baptist Union and is the chair of GRI. His main areas of research are relating faith to life and work, theological reflection, adult education, and the dialogue between science and faith. Friends, let us welcome Reverend Dr. John Weaver with a big applause. Yes, again the Mysore cap and the shawl woven by hand from the state of Manipur. And then we have the distinguished professor, fellow of Royal Society, Dr. Russell Coburn, and he arrived just today early morning, 5 o'clock from London. So the big difference of 5.5 hours, perhaps he might not have got enough rest, sleep, but he's ready to be here with you, and he's here maybe just an hour of rest, and then he is here. A person of brilliance, person of hard work, a person of interested in faith and reason, and this is a gist about him. Professor Russell Coburn has research interests in nanotechnology and its application to magnetism, electronics, and optics. Before returning to Cambridge in 2010, he held positions at the CNRS Paris, University of Durham, and Imperial College in London. He is the founder of 3 startup companies and the inventor of the anti-counterfeiting technology, laser surface authentication. He has had over 60 patents granted and is a frequent invited speaker at international conferences. He is the winner of the 2003 GSK Westminster Medal and Prize, the 2006 Degussa Science to Business Award, the 2007 Hermes International Technology Award, the 2008 Institute of Physics Patterson Medal and Prize, and the 2016 Royal Society Patterson Medal. He was one of the 2015 IEE Magnetic Society Distinguished Lecturers. He has held 2 ERC grants, an Advanced Investigator grant, and the Proof of Concept Award. He is a fellow of the Royal Society. Much we can speak about. He is a very serious, top-ranking scientist, and he is also a business person, and much more than he is also involved in the faith and religion. So once a month he told me today morning that he will be speaking to his small community of faithful, around 20 or maybe around 50, so who are assembling in a village church and preaching. So he finds time among all these various interests to be a faithful speaker, preacher, and share his faith to the others. So, Dr. Russell, we are happy to welcome, and let us welcome him with a big applause. Please. So we are assembled here because of them. So they are here to give us, enlighten us, and all of them are distinguished scientists in biology, in environmental sciences and geology, and in physics, in magnetism, and other allied areas. But they are also committed, faithful servants of the church. They may not be belonging to some particular church, but in the overarching Christian belief and serving through the reason. So they are here, and we are happy to have from three main theological colleges. We have 85 people from Kolar Theological College under the leadership of Dr. Cherian, and welcome Dr. Cherian, the staff members and the others. Could you please stand up? Dr. Cherian, and yes, he is the backbencher, maybe in the parliament. So all other students, can you just stand up please? All from the Kolar. Yes. Please be seated. Yes, thank you. And then we have the Gurukul seminary, that is from Chennai, and the principal was our former ISET Dean, Reverend Dr. John Samuel, and we have a 30-member team from Gurukul. So I welcome them and their leader and the members. Could you please stand up? Yes, the professors, and then yes, most welcome. We also have Reverend Dr. Moses from KUT, the Kerala United Seminary, from Theological Seminary from Trivandrum, and Principal Reverend Dr. David Joy, who is also a very good friend of mine and a colleague. And we have another 30 members who are budding theologians. So could you please, Dr. Moses and the other team members, could you please stand up? And most welcome. So let's also we also have from far away, we have a four-member team from Bangladesh under the leadership of Pabon. And could you please stand up? So let us also welcome them. So Pabon and his team, they wanted to establish more interactions in science and religion in Bangladesh, and we will be closely associating, and maybe we can try maybe through the Templeton Foundation, and as well through the Faraday Institute. So we have other very eminent church leaders. Reverend Dr. Reggie, he was a council member here in the Ecumenical Christian Center Council and the General Secretary of the Kerala Christian Council, and then a learned and established theologian. He was principal, I think, in the Orthodox Theological College, Kottayam, and let us welcome him as well with a big applause. So we have a few other friends, Reverend Prasad Achan from the Marthama Church. Then we have two journalists from Kerala, Dr. Manjapara and director of Yadavattam. So let us. Yes, I think Reverend Alexander Abraham, please come to the forefront, please. And then both of you, Obedachan. And I must say that, Reverend Dr. Alexander Abraham, he was a professor of physics and he was teaching many years in Marthoma College there in Tiruvalla. And afterwards, he thought of becoming a Marthoma pastor. And please, yes, let us welcome Reverend Dr. Alexander Abraham, and then Abhay, who is the principal of a school for the otherwise talented people. And then we have Jasmine from the Lutheran Church Germany, but taking care in the Trankebar, Ziegenbalg Center. I have, yes, Captain Matthew. Yes, he's here, a pilot. No, we do science and religion. And anyone else I have missed?
Participants from IIT Mumbai.
Yes. We have participants from IIT Mumbai. Dr. Emmanuel. And then, yes, he's a chemist. And then a businessman. And then we also have Dr. Tenzin Pasang from the Buddhist tradition. He is a medical practitioner. And we may have a Hindu monk who will also be coming, and Dr. Ashok Alur, who will be giving the afternoon lecture instead of me. He will be speaking today 2:15 to 3:15 time. He is Dr. Ashok Alur, an agriculturist, and then he is also a consultant and advisor to Prime Ministers of Mozambique, Swaziland, and Armenia. And he will be, I think he will be here. So friends, most welcome. And around 45 minutes, that is the way we are organized. So they will be speaking, and then we will have 15 minutes of question answer. So it will be chaired by somebody. So the first session will be given by Dr. Dennis Alexander. And I will be chairing the session, and I wish you 3 days of wonderful listening, and so all of us together we will work towards understanding the relationship between science and religion, faith and reason. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great privilege and joy to be with you this morning. Thank you so much for your welcome. We appreciate that. It's always wonderful for me to come back to India. I have two granddaughters who were born in Mumbai. They were born in Breach Candy Hospital in Mumbai, and so somehow that also gives us a very special link with the country of India. And so it's a great joy for us to be here. So our topic this morning, as you can see, I don't know how many of you can see the screen over there, but our topic is how to relate science and faith. So this is going to be a very general talk. I'm sure for some of you it will be fairly well known, and others may be a little bit new. And so we'll go slow and we'll just think about the topic in some detail. And clearly, if we want to investigate the relationship between two great enterprises like science and faith, then we need to do some definitions and understanding. I myself am coming to you from the Christian tradition, as you've just been hearing. I'm also very sensitive to all of those of you who are coming from different traditions. But one aspect of modern science is that it's pretty much the same all around the world. And it is a community of people who share certain things in common. And so that's what I'd like to start us thinking about. In fact, defining modern science is quite difficult. And of course, I'm thinking this morning in English. If you use the word science in Cambridge, then you're referring to the natural sciences departments down the road, physics, chemistry, biology, and so on. So we're talking about modern empirically based science, experimental science. Of course, if you go back to medieval science in English, then it was scientia. It referred to, in Latin, to any body of constructed academic knowledge and so on. And it really wasn't until the 1870s that the word scientist was invented. In fact, earlier than that, it was invented in 1832 or thereabouts, by the Reverend William Whewell, who was master of Trinity College in Cambridge, in my own university. And it took a while for the term scientist to become accepted by people of those days. They call themselves natural philosophers. So the scientists of earlier days were all called natural philosophers. Charles Darwin called himself a natural philosopher. In fact, William Whewell also invented lots of other words. William Whewell invented the word physicist. He invented the word cathode and anode. I can imagine him sitting there in his office, his lovely room in Trinity College in Cambridge, just spending time inventing words. I think that's what he did most of the time. But most scientists don't realize that the name of their profession comes in English from a 19th century Anglican clergyman. Now, of course, when we use the word science in English today, as I mentioned, it's referring really to empirically based science, experimental sciences. But as you go and look at the word science in almost every other country of the world, I'd be interested to know about your own languages in this respect. But I've given a few examples there of European languages, the word science in German, Wissenschaft, or la science in French. I speak Turkish, Bilim, Arabic, Elim, and so on. And so those meanings are much more like scientia. The word Wissenschaft is a much broader word. It encompasses all kinds of constructed academic knowledge. Whereas in English, when we use the word science, it really is referring to something more like the natural sciences. So that makes the discussion quite interesting. As we go around and do Faraday courses in different parts of the world, we have to be thinking about what are we really talking about today. So what I'm really talking about here this morning is the relationship between the experimental sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, environmental science, psychology, the relationship between all those sciences and faith. And that's what we're going to be thinking about. And so here's a definition of science in the modern English way, modern science way of thinking about it. Science is an organized endeavor to explain the properties of the physical world by means of empirically testable theories, that means experimentally testable theories, constructed by a research community trained in specialized techniques. No definition is perfect, but I think that will summarize a lot of what we do in the scientific community today. So what you publish on your Facebook page is not science, and what you publish in scientific journals certainly is science. And I want to just run through 7 aspects of modern science that are not true of every different discipline, but many of these aspects are true of all the different disciplines. So point number 1, science in its methodologies excludes questions of ultimate purpose, value, and meaning. Now, back in the 17th century and the emergence of modern experimental science, you still find that the Aristotelian science was very powerful. It was taught in the universities and so on. And of course, Aristotelian science would want to know about ultimate purpose. What is the real telos, the real ultimate purpose of this study that we're doing? And then in the 17th century, many of those early natural philosophers said, well, we can't decide that. That's too difficult for us. And so they took away the question of ultimate purpose, and they said that we should really just focus down on the physical world. What can we understand together and agree about in the physical world? And of course, if they were doing the kind of science that some Greek philosophers were doing, Then they would be interested in the development of the egg. You know, Aristotle had a wonderful description of the development of chickens. That's a great description, and he would be thinking about the ultimate purpose, the telos. But the people in the 17th century, they just said, no, we can't do ultimate purpose, so we're just going to focus on development. We're going to look at the egg, we're going to look at the chicken, okay, and how is it developed and so on. And so natural philosophy began to change over that period. Secondly, of course, science is looking for testable hypotheses, which in principle can be falsified. Now, that can be actually quite difficult in some disciplines. It's quite easy in my own discipline, which is biology, biomedical sciences. We can do that every day. We can falsify our ideas. However, if you go and look at the idea of the multiverse, it's quite difficult to falsify the idea of a multiverse, the idea that there's maybe an infinite number of universes. And so some years ago, a physicist called Peter Voigt wrote this book, Not Even Wrong. In other words, you can't even disprove, you cannot even falsify the idea of a multiverse and so on. So falsifiability is a really important principle, but it's much easier in some disciplines than in others. And then, of course, a third characteristic of science is that it is seeking to make generalizations about the properties of matter, and the highest level of generalizations we call laws. That's more true, of course, in mathematical physics. In biology, we don't really look for laws very much because biology is too complex. We do have a few laws, actually, but then we all have to modify them with the exceptions and so on. But clearly, the idea of law is very central to the mathematical physics and so forth. And of course, it's a generalization, isn't it, about the properties of matter. Something just keeps happening over and over again in the same kind of way. And so we call it a law. Fourth characteristic of science, values mathematics very highly. Clearly in biology, if we can put some mathematics in our papers, they were more likely to be accepted. Fourth, and then number 5, science expects reproducibility of results. If we do an experiment in Cambridge, we hope that scientists will be able to reproduce that in Bengaluru or in Sydney or in Beijing, some other country. In principle, science is reproducible because it's depending upon the intelligibility, the reproducibility of the properties of matter and so forth. Number 6, in science we're aiming at objectivity. When we write our scientific papers, we don't normally say, I did this, I did the other. We normally use the passive voice. We say, it was done. Everybody knows that science is done by real people, but we're trying to give that impression, at least, that it's objective and it can be reproduced by anybody and so forth. And then number 7, and this is really important, scientific knowledge aims to be publicly observable and repeatable, and you really need to publish it in good peer-reviewed journals. So that is the body of scientific knowledge we're trying to construct, something that is really observable and reproducible by anybody. And that, I hope, there's nothing electric about to go bang. No, we're okay. It's still safe, that's okay. Right, so those are some characteristics of modern science, very briefly. Now, of course, when you look at those characteristics, you can see how they overlap, don't they, with many other disciplines. They overlap with history, because historians also want to be objective, we hope. Historians also want to look at data, they want to get at the facts and interpret those facts and so on. Or you can look at sociology. Sociologists also want to get data, they want to study big populations and make generalizations about the properties of those human populations. And so there's lots and lots of different overlaps there with science. But what I want to say this morning is science is distinctive, it has its own particular questions, and it's important that we see it as a body of knowledge that has these particular properties. Now actually back in the, especially the last century, philosophers spent a lot of time trying to clarify the distinction between modern science and other disciplines. It's called the demarcation problem? How do you demarcate? How do you distinguish between science and non-science? And they spent a lot of time on that. And I think in the end they sort of gave up. Because scientists are very frustrating people for philosophers to work with. Okay? We scientists just do what seems to be getting the right answer to a particular problem. And so it's quite hard sometimes to make a very clear distinction between science and non-science. But I think that distinction is important. It's a kind of boundary which is shifting, it's moving, it's fuzzy, we call it a fuzzy boundary, but still there is a distinction there which is, I think, important. And so clearly, when you're looking at a scientific journal like Nature over there on the left-hand side of the screen, that is a top scientific journal. That is clearly modern science. If you're looking on the right-hand side at your Facebook page, that is not science. You're not going to publish that in a scientific journal. Okay, so we have this sort of distinction in different kinds of literature. Now, let's think a little bit about faith. Faith is also quite slippery, isn't it, in terms of definitions here. Well, I'm going to just come to you from my own Christian tradition and think about two aspects of faith. We can think about faith in an academic way. I know many of you are studying theology here, so that's the academic study of faith. And then, of course, you can publish it in journals, you can write long articles about different doctrines of the faith and so on. But then, of course, in all religions, and in the Christian faith, you have the personal aspect of faith. So I, as a Christian, then have a personal trust in God for my salvation. And so that's distinctive. I could be an academic theologian, I could write lots of papers about theology, but I could do that without any personal faith. And I want to say in a moment, we're going to see how both academic faith and personal faith have similarities in certain aspects of science. But before we do that, I want to present to you a very simple model of how we can compare different types of human knowledge, including science and theology. So I want you to picture that all of human knowledge is like a cube. Okay, there's the cube, and we can slice that cube into many different levels. And each level represents one particular way of studying the world, one particular form of human knowledge. Now, I put scientific knowledge at the top there. That's not because it's most important. You've got to put it somewhere, okay, in this model. So we have one level represents scientific knowledge. What is that? Well, as we say, we're looking at the mechanisms of the world, we're looking at the physical properties of the world, we're trying to make generalizations about the properties of matter and so forth, all these big scientific questions. But then we've got level 2, that's the ethical questions. What ought we to do with all this wonderful new information that we are gaining from science? What ought we to do with our own lives? How ought we to behave? The great ethical investigations. And then level 3 here, we've got the aesthetic level of knowledge. What do we count as beauty in the world? What do we count as beauty in poetry, in literature, and the arts, and so forth? Very important areas of human knowledge. And then level 4, we've got our own personal knowledge of the world, our own personal biographies, the I language, what I experience every day. And obviously that is the most personal, that's the most important knowledge to us, isn't it? And then level 5, we've got these great religious and philosophical questions. We've got the question of, why is there a universe anyway? The question that Stephen Hawking used to ask, what breathes fire into the equations? Does life have any personal, any purpose in an ultimate sense? Does God exist? And so on and so on. Now, of course, the point about this model is just simply to point out there are many ways of knowing. There are many ways of knowing. And these forms of knowledge are complementary to each other. That's why we call it the complementary model. These forms of knowledge are not rivals to each other, but they are complementary. We need them all to do justice to this complex reality that we call life. And I'm going to put some arrows there going up and down, because of course this is one reality, but most of us do not have the capacity to incorporate the whole of reality in our minds all at the same time. In a university, we break up the whole university campus into different disciplines, don't we? So this model represents the way that we do academic research and study in our universities today. We need different disciplines to study things in different kinds of ways. But we also remember that it is one single reality. Now, I think most scientists, not all scientists, most scientists recognize that this complementarity model is true. It's the right kind of way of doing science. Let me give you an example here from Lord Martin Rees, who was previously Master of Trinity College in Cambridge, and also previously President of the Royal Society in Britain. And he wrote this. He's an atheist, actually, so this is an atheist writing. He says, "The preeminent mystery is why anything exists at all. What breathes life into the equations and actualizes them in a real cosmos? Such questions lie beyond science. They are the province of philosophers and theologians." So clearly Martin Rees is recognizing the reality of the complementarity model. He's not using that language, but recognizing you need many different types of approach. And also I think the complementarity model can be useful as we think about the relationship between different types of study in our own scientific disciplines. I started my life as a neuroscientist. I did my PhD in the Institute of Psychiatry in London. Well, let's just think about brain and mind. So when I'm studying your brain, I put you in my scanner, my fMRI scanner or whatever it might be, and then I'm using the IT language about your brain. I'm describing your brain in the language of neuroscience, so I'm using the IT language in that way. But of course I know that at the same time you're awake, you're inside the scanner, hopefully having a nice time in there, and you are using the I language about yourself, your mind language. And of course as we think about the IT language of our brains and the I language of our personal experience, these are complementary. These are obviously not contradictory to each other. We need them both at the same time to do justice to the experience of life. And then, of course, out of the mind language comes personal relationships and our own personal biography and so on. So that's just one very simple way of looking at the relationship between different types of knowledge. And it's also, I think, important as we think about that. It helps to guard us against what we often call the God of the gaps idea. I want to spend a little bit of time on this. You may be familiar with this idea, but the kind of yellow rectangle there on the left-hand side of the screen represents all the scientific knowledge that we currently know. But then, of course, we've got these little white circles. These represent the gaps in our present scientific knowledge. And I'm very happy those gaps are here, because we didn't have gaps, we scientists would not have a job. Okay? We need the gaps, because our job is to fill up the gaps of our scientific knowledge. But the trouble is, there are some believers, and some atheists do this as well, and they say, aha, here's a gap in our scientific knowledge. So that's particularly where God is acting. God is acting in those gaps. So we don't understand the origin of life very well. That's certainly true. So that's what God does. We don't understand the origin of the first molecule of DNA. Oh, that's what God does. We don't really fully understand when the first cell came into being. Oh, that's what God does. So they begin to locate the activities of God in the gap of our scientific knowledge. And of course, I have to say, from a Christian perspective, that's theologically very suspect. And the reason for that is, if you go back to the early church fathers, if you go back to this wonderful commentary on Genesis, published in, what was it, 310 AD by Augustine. I hope I have my date right there. So Augustine wrote this great commentary on Genesis, and there he says nature is what God does, or nature is what God has done. So he's seeing there the understanding that God is the author of the whole of creation. So our gap in our scientific knowledge shouldn't really make any difference at all, should it? Because after all, the whole of life, the whole of created life, all that exists is the book written by the author of creation. That's the Augustinian idea here, and clearly the biblical idea as well. And of course, from a practical point of view, it's very dangerous if you start putting your belief in God in the gaps of our present scientific knowledge, especially the things that science is quite good at explaining eventually. We might have to wait a long time, but science will get there in the end. And so what happens to your concept of God then as science expands? As science expands, your idea of God becomes smaller and smaller, and those little white circles gradually disappear. And so I think it's important theologically that we have an understanding of God who is truly the author of all that exists. And of course, you are many of you theology students, so you'll be very familiar with this, but the idea that God is the primary cause of all that exists, and out of that primary cause comes the secondary causes whereby they exist. And so we as scientists can study the secondary causes, all the mechanisms that God uses to bring about this universe. We certainly cannot we cannot investigate the primary cause, and so that's an important distinction here. Okay, so here we've noticed so far that science and faith are giving complementary types of description and understanding to the reality around us. I'm also fascinated by the many similarities that there are between the ways of thinking in science and in faith. And I want to spend the second half of this talk thinking about some of those similarities. I actually written 9 of them there on the screen. Commitment, number 1. Number 2, coherence. Number 3, compactness, simplicity, elegance. Number 4, awe and wonder. Number 5, evidence. Number 6, falsifiability. We've talked about that already. Number 7, prediction. Number 8, further exploration. Number 9, intuition. Okay, we don't have time to talk about all those this morning. I'm sure you'll be glad to hear. But I want to just give an illustration from a few of those to see how the scientific and faith enterprises, yes, they're distinct, they give distinct types of knowledge, but as enterprises, they actually have a huge amount in common. And so we're going to start then by thinking about commitment to the scientific enterprise and commitment to faith. And I think this is the place really where science and faith come closest together in terms of their personal commitments. Because many scientists do not realize that they have to make a whole range of philosophical assumptions before we can even start doing our science. They're assumptions that are not provable by science itself, but we need them to get started. For example, you need faith that the universe is comprehensible, that it's coherent, that we have the potential to understand it. We have to start with that assumption. That might seem obvious to us now, a few centuries after doing modern science, but it wasn't at all obvious to those who really got modern science going. Here is Eugene Wigner, a Nobel Prize winner in physics, who remarks that the miracle of the appropriateness of the language of mathematics for the formulation of the laws of physics is a wonderful gift that we neither understand nor deserve. And that's been a kind of a puzzle, really, to mathematical physicists for many, many centuries. Of course, if they are believers, then it's much less of a puzzle, because that's what we expect. If you live in God's universe, with the mind behind the universe, then that's sort of what you expect. But for many, many mathematical physicists, it's a real puzzle. And in science, we also have to take on trust, as I say, that matter behaves in a reproducible way. If we do an experiment this week and repeat it under the same conditions, then next week we hope we will get the same results. And that's an act of faith, really. Well, you can't prove the reproducibility of the properties of matter starting just by studying it. You have to take that for granted. That is a starting point. And of course, all scientists have to make the assumption that their minds are rational enough so that they can obtain true understanding of the universe through science. You can't prove that. you've got to start, we have to start with the brains we have, with the minds we have, and so you simply have to make that philosophical assumption. And as Einstein put it, the most incomprehensible thing about the world is that it is comprehensible. And I think that's a very profound thought, isn't it, when you think about it? Why should the world be comprehensible? If you come to the world as an atheist, well, why would it be comprehensible? How is it that we can evolve to this place in the universe where we have minds that are sufficient to write wonderful equations describing the properties of the world? I'm sure we'll hear more about that from Professor Cockburn a little later on.